There are so many new and exciting kaiju to learn more about as the monsterverse advances. One of the very mysterious but magnificent kaiju of the monsterverse is the newly introduced oldest titan, Methuselah. It is even said that he predates the other titans. Of course, we're talking about on Earth. But what was life like in his time? Now, we can only wonder, and we'll attempt to paint that picture in this theory POV, where we delve into the imaginings of Methuselah's life as a baby. Lightning tore through the sky. The rain chased the roaring noises that it made as it echoed throughout the vast expanse. The lands at that time were very hostile. Creatures of all shapes and sizes scurried. The only ones that stayed behind were the ones that had buckets for heads. They stood on 6 legs with 2 tails dragging behind them, their throats positioned upwards into a frill shaped like a flower that caught the water as it fell down in droves. If one didn't know any better, they would say they were just trees or very oddly shaped rocks that just happened to look like living organisms. They never moved, they never flinched as the lightning flashed, as 10 bolts at once touched down all around them. Occasionally, a stray bolt of lightning would hit one of them. There would be silence thereafter, and then it would just drop down dead on its side. Its fellow brethren would just continue standing there, still as stone, as if nothing ever happened. There were mudslides and rock slides, sinkholes, and all manner of natural disasters you could think of, as if the land was always shifting and changing like a Rubik's Cube. Storms like this would rage on for years. If the creatures there were not powerful enough to survive it, they would simply die out. Many species met their extinction with year-long storms like this. If they were lucky, the storm would abate in the 2nd year, or be completely gone within the second half of the 2nd year. Animals that took to a subterranean lifestyle weren't safe either. Many of them, due to the rising water levels, were chased out from their homes, and some of them were drowned as their tunnels collapsed, their entrances and exits sealed off, their homes and safe havens becoming their tombs in which they drowned. It wouldn't even matter if any of their species were above ground, because nobody could hear them cry over the roaring rain and the thunder. Steam pockets erupted from all the pressure and the tons of land suddenly giving way. And it's within these disagreeable conditions that our character Methuselah was born. The sound of heavy footfalls can be heard. Suddenly a large silver-scaled foot enters the clearing. It's wide and thick, and it belongs to a body that hugs itself very close to the ground. The creature crushes the ferns as she walks by. The jungle canopy, swaying to and fro, makes the sunlight peeking through look as though it's dancing. She walks under an archway and calls out, a low, bellowing, whale-like noise. A deeper sound responds to hers. It's her mother, a majestic female quadruped, standing boldly and protectively over the nest of her daughter. The younger female, the mother of the clutch, licks her lips and looks down at her nest. She asks her mother by name if she can approach the nest. In their culture, as they get older, they don't refer to each other as mother or father. Everyone had a distinct name to identify their smell. That is what they would call each other. Her mother's name was Padmao, and hers was Uma. Her mother shifted, looking like a large piece of rock. You wouldn't be able to tell what she is standing there if she was perfectly still, as the colors of her reflective scales made her look like her immediate rocky surroundings. Her plated back at the top shone green as it reflected the canopy above. After the mother gave her permission to approach, Uma then checked on her eggs. Uma was worried because the eggs were a little more warm than normal. She worried if all 12 of them would survive. After all, there's been a bout of bad fertility in these past years. Even still, the females were still hopeful. Uma looked around from left to right as though expecting someone else to be there. Her mother Padmao assured her that the males were off patrolling. It was also the responsibility of the males to gather material. Her mother chuckled and then went around to be beside her. She nuzzled her and assured her that she shouldn't worry, that her only concern is to make sure that these eggs hatch. Uma thought about her other offspring, the ones that had already hatched, her older children. With a smile, her mother went to check on them. Padmao appreciated her daughter's determination to take care of her young. She also was proud in having a hand in it happening. Padmao wasn't that old, but she was considered very wise for her years. There were still much older females that she looked up to. But for her immediate family, her daughter and the daughter's mate, her older brother, and other family members that were part of their herd, they pretty much looked up to her. She exited the canopy with the dancing lights and saw the rest of the herd, or at least a part of them. An aggregate of males formed around the watering hole. In a long bellow, Padmao called out to them. She watched with joy as 6 of the younger ones held up their heads and came running towards her in joy. They all nuzzled her in greeting. She cleaned some of the parasites off of their tough hide. Then she sent them on their way. One stuck around. This one was who we know now as Methuselah. But for much of his life, his family, friends, and everyone he knew from his old life called him Argo. "What have you learned today, Argo?" said Padmao. "Well, I didn't learn how to swim, that's for sure. But I don't feel so bad because my brothers don't know how to swim either." "Do you know how to swim, Padmao?" Padmao smiled and started walking towards the males. "Well," she said, looking back at her grandson as he followed her, looking up at her with admiration, "I learned how to float." "No, you didn't. Look how heavy you are. How's that possible?" "Anything is possible if you believe, Argo." "Dad says you said that just because you don't know the answer." "Well, he might be right. Sometimes it's not so bad not to have all the answers. Keeps your brain active, keeps you thinking, keeps your mind open." "Well, Dad also says that if you keep your mind open, then everything will just fall out of it." "Well, that's why you close back the lid afterwards." Argo stopped in his tracks and rolled around on his little back, dying of laughter. Padmao smiled. She loved watching her grandson laugh. He was the only one of his bunch that laughed as much as he did, and she just hoped that at some point, when he was older, he would make the decision to hold on to his innocence and his humor. When Padmao caught up to the rest of the herd, she stopped in front of Argo's father, Arloft. He reared onto his hind legs and then placed his front legs over to one side, and then repeated the process, doing it to the other side. To us, he would seem like a very large dog trying to initiate playtime. But this was in fact a greeting. This was how members of Argo's herd tested to see if the others were healthy and if they still respected the hierarchy. This is one of those strange cases where Argo's father was older than his grandmother. He had the ultimate authority over his little family, even though he was not the ultimate leader of the herd. He locked his swooping horns in with Padmao's and wrestled with her gently. She swayed her head from side to side with his horns in lock, and he did the same. He then backed up and pulled her closer to him, then pushed her back as if they were initiating some sort of salsa dance. Argo, of course, took all of this in and learned from the adults. After Padmao allowed herself to be led by Arloft, he unlocked his horns from hers and let her go. Argo listened as the adults argued over the materials and there being a lack thereof. Pretty soon they were going to have to leave. There was another creature in the vicinity that also had a use for the same materials they were using to build their safe haven. And yes, our Methuselah comes from a long line of builders, creatures who formed the mountains. As time went on, Argo got much older and much larger. They moved away from their initial home. Argo's younger siblings, who were eggs before, had survived. Only half of them did, and they were all girls. Arloft was not very happy about this, but he had already a plan and males picked out for each of them when they were of age. After all, in his herd, the only way the females would breed is if he was breeding with them or if he picked who they would breed with. Argo's appearance changed throughout the many years. He was first very scraggly, like a gecko, but as he aged into a teenager, his muscles started to show. His father would train him by stepping on his back with one of his feet and urging his son along to pull him to walk with his father's weight on his back. As the years went on, his father could put 2 of his front legs on Argo's back. Arloft had told his son that his ultimate strength would happen not when he could carry the full weight of one of his comrades, but when he could pull 3 behind him. Strength was very important in Argo's family, but that wouldn't be the ultimate test that Argo would face. One night, as Argo lay down, his sisters all curled up underneath him, his stomach warm in a blanket to them, his mother, Uma, approached him and nuzzled his tail gently. Molly? What's going on? He asked his mother innocently, looking up at her face, or at least trying to see it in the dark. Argo, the storm is coming back. What? So soon? Uma looked down at her son. Usually when she looked down at him, she was either very stern and angry with him for something he had done, for not trying hard, or very happy, being playful. This time her face was strange. She just wore an expression of worry. Uma led him away from the nesting ground, away from his sisters. They were walking along the dirt path for quite some time, until they came upon the rest of the herd, mostly all the males, right by the river. There Argo saw his father, Arloft, and the chief. Go with them, said Argo's mother. Argo looked back to his mom, and then looked ahead of the pack and walked toward them. His father beckoned him over. Argo looked around and saw that he was one of the youngest of his kind. The chief was mighty and tall and large. His armor glistened in the starlight. He had the longest tail out of any of them, and he swung it wildly as he spoke expressively. It is time, my brothers. I did not expect this to happen so soon, but nevertheless we have to prepare for it. I can smell the storm, but behind this storm comes an even bigger one. Behind this storm comes 50 more storms. The greatest epoch we'll ever see. The one that will change our history. The other younger males asked what this meant. Why was the storm any different? At that moment, Argo took the time to look up to the sky, as did a lot of the other males. His father saw him looking up at the sky, and when Argo met his father's gaze, his father turned away, almost as though he was apologizing for something. But Chief, what makes this storm different than all the others? How do you know? All the other males mumbled in agreement. I have lived very long, longer than most of you. You already know my title, and that is why you have to have faith in me. I see things beyond what you can see. I look up at the sky, I smell, I hear, I feel. And right now, there has never been a formation of clouds such as the ones we see above us. It is the pressure of something coming, more than just a storm. An event. Possibly the one thing that might end us all. There were gasps in the herd. Argo was scared now. He never felt that very often, especially as he got older. But how were they supposed to fight something that was more powerful than everything else he's ever known? Something that could kill all of them in one fell swoop. Arloft, Argo's father, spoke up. Are you saying that the only way that we can survive this is to become one with the earth? No, young one. Then please, old one, what are you saying? I'm saying that only the strong of us will survive. And even that is a low probability. After that meeting, Arloft walked his son back to the rest of the herd with the females and sleeping young. They walked in silence together. The other males veered off into their respective places. Argo looked up at his father to his left. He kept on staring at him and looking back at the ground, wanting to say something to his father, but not having the strength, not even knowing what to say. Speak, boy, Arloft said, not looking at his son, looking straight ahead and walking more surely. Well, from what it sounded like back there, Chief was saying that something bad was going to happen, like a megastorm, and it was going to be worse than all the others. Is it true that a lot of us are going to die? His father sighed. Isn't that what you heard? Yes, a lot of us will die. How do we know which ones will stay alive? That's the decision each of us are going to have to make. But, Father, how do we stop it? His father stopped in his tracks and looked over at his son. The moonlight glistened behind the frill on his head. Argo, the minute that you realize that you do not have any control over nature is the minute that you will find your true strength and bravery. Not fighting something that can't be fought with, but trying to survive it or accepting your fate. Now, the only thing that we can do is exactly what the chief told us to before we left. All of the ones who can, breed with the able-bodied females, and kill the offspring. Wait, what? Argo whipped his head around. He had not heard that part. Maybe he zoned out, but this was coming as a shock to him. Were you not listening, son? Father, I didn't hear him say that. Well, he did. Kill the babies? Kill my little sisters? And... Argo. Father, we can't do that. We can't do that. That's not right. Listen to me, boy. This is how it's always been. But why? Feeling sorry for his son, Arloft sat down in the cold dust. He looked up at the clouds forming above them. No longer could they see the stars or the moon. The clouds looked like the bellowing waves over the sea. They didn't even resemble clouds anymore. They felt like the breath of a malevolent force bigger than this entire planet. Sometimes there are things that you're going to have to do that you don't want to. The reason why we kill the young is because the females need to stay alive. In a situation like this with the storm, we have to keep moving. We have to keep on running away from the storm until we can't run anymore. And then, when the storm catches up to us, we have to use every bit of energy that we have to survive, to keep ourselves alive. If we left the babies alive, especially the very young ones, the females would get stupid. The females always lose their brains when they have young ones. It's because their brains are rewritten to only care about the offspring. What's so wrong with that? Well, think about it. If all of us were to die off, could those offspring defend themselves? No, they require us. So it makes no sense to prioritize something that cannot immediately give us life. Do you understand? Argo held his head down and looked back towards the nest where his mother and everyone else was presumably sleeping. Is it because Mommy can give you new babies, like more of me, but my little siblings can't? That's right. If they die, that's it. It's going to be a very harsh world. If your mother dies trying to save them, or she's not thinking about saving herself, they'll live for a little while. But because it's so harsh, and the storm is so harsh and violent, they won't live that much longer. She would have died for nothing. We've seen this happen throughout generations, over and over again. So when a storm is coming, if the babies aren't old enough, we have to kill them. What do you do with their bodies? We stockpile them. Secrete a little bit of salt. Sometimes we may garner salt from the ocean water. And then what? Well, then we use them as food. Argo tilted his head in shock at his father. Father, we don't eat flesh. Yes, but there are things that do. And if we could save them off from eating us, farther enough for us to get away, then... Argo was in such disbelief at what his father was saying. He's heard of stories of them being able to do what's necessary, but this was beyond horrid. So you're going to take my little siblings and feed them to the beasts out there that eat other beasts? That's exactly what I'm saying, Argo. We'll scatter their bodies in pieces all around, far away from us, and while the hunters are tracking them down and unearthing those pieces, they'll eat rotting flesh up to a point. It will give us time to move away. Before then, we'll breed the females so that the females will start making new babies. By the time we're able to find a better place to live, someplace more stable, well, then we'll have the babies. If it is still unstable at the time we reach that place, we'll just do the process over again. Use those babies and stave off the hunters, keep moving, until finally we're able to outrun the storm or outlast it. I know that this is tough for you to hear, but it shouldn't be. We are warriors. This is our way. Get some sleep." And with that, Arloft walked away. He no longer wanted to sit there in the cold dirt, receiving his son's cold stare. He shook his head from side to side, his really large tusks weighing him down. He had no conscience. He knew what had to be done, and he wasn't going to put aside killing his kids to make sure that all of the herd survives, but looking at his son, who was now of age and able to understand, he's never felt that look from anyone. Even the mothers, even though they mourned, they always understood what needed to be done. The sacrifices that they needed to make. As Argo went back to his nest and laid beside his sisters, he observed at how much more smaller they were than he, how much they depended on him. He couldn't see himself killing them and chopping up their bodies. As a matter of fact, no matter what this storm brought, he was determined not to make that happen. In the coming weeks, Argo's herd grew very anxious. The storm grew more restless, and it seemed as though the dark, folding clouds crept even closer and lower to the landscape, as though they were ready to grab up the herd from below. The winds picked up in speed, and Argo and his herd watched firsthand as trees that have been there fastened to the earth for many, many centuries were suddenly uprooted and swallowed up by the clouds above. It was a gruesome and horrendous sight. According to the chief, this was only the beginning. If this was really the case, then this was in fact unlike any storm that Argo's herd has ever seen. The chief finally decided that it was time, and when the evening came, they would kill the offspring and start their journey away from the storm. He was hoping that the movements of the storm would alter. The storm would just go overhead and leave them alone. But it wasn't. From what he could tell, either the storm was covering a very large radius, or it was extremely localized. Of Argo's younger clutch, only 7 of them had remained, all girls. Hearing the chief's last orders, Argo tried one last-ditch attempt to speak to his mother and grandmother. He called them to the side away from the males and told them what the chief had said, to which they replied, "I'm sorry, Argo, but this is how it's always been." "Padmel, how could you say that?" said Argo. These are your grandchildren. Would you do that to me?" "Well, of course not. You're old enough now." "What? There has to be another way. I mean, if the old ones aren't strong enough and the old ones die, it's only the young ones we have to depend on." Uma, Argo's mother, cut in. "I can always have more children." "And what if something happens to you, huh?" "It will be 10 full sun cycles before your little siblings are old enough to even be considered adults. We can't take that risk. They're more able-bodied females. I've already made it. It's time." Argo angrily ran away, back to see his little sisters, who were still nearby the nest. They were feeding off of the lower bushes. One of his little sisters, the fattest one, turned around and saw him. Her tail wagged happily. "Argo!" She ran up to meet him. "What's happening?" She was referring to the violent winds and trees being unearthed. He looked back towards the herd, and then looked at his 7 little sisters. "Guys, come over here. Behind this tree. Come on, follow me. Hurry up." His sisters wasted no time and listened to him. They looked up to their brother. They would do anything he asked of them. "Do you guys trust me?" "Of course we trust you, Argo." "Yeah, always. For their whole lives," answered a third one. "All right, then what I'm about to tell you, you cannot tell the grown-ups. And you have to totally trust me. You have to totally listen to me. You understand? No matter how much it sounds stupid, no matter how ridiculous it feels." "Okay." "We're gonna run away." "What do you mean, from the storm?" "No. We're gonna run away from the grown-ups." "Why would we do that?" asked the smallest female. "Sheila," said Argo, turning to the fattest one, and presumably the oldest of the sibling bunch. "It's not safe here anymore. The adults want the herd to survive, but for them to do that, they think the best thing to do is to leave you behind." It's because we can't catch up, Argo. We can follow them. We can prove that we can catch up. You can't do that. Why not? You're my big brother, but I know that you're hiding something from me. Why would they leave us? They would never do that. Because Argo wondered whether or not he should tell them. Because they have to think about the entire herd. But we're part of the herd. How could he tell his little sisters that their mother and grandmother and father and chief of the entire herd wanted to kill them? Lightning struck the ground someplace nearby. All of them screamed. Guys, do you trust me? I just want to know that you trust me. Don't ask a whole bunch of questions. I'll explain everything. But right now, do you trust me? They all answered in unison, shakily, but affirmatively. Then I need you to follow me, right now. Don't ask any questions. Don't say goodbye to anyone. Just come with me, now. And with that, Argo ran off with his sisters in tow. Right before they left the area, a large body stepped in front of them. Argo fell back onto his back, his shell making an indent in the grass and getting stuck there. Sheila and his other little sisters tried to help him up as they all gazed up in horror at what stood before them. Argo was sure it was one of those beasts that ate his kind. But it wasn't. It was another one of him. Not his father, but another young male. Argo, I can't let you go, said the male. Argo was ready to fight him, and it seemed ridiculous because the male was about 12 times larger than he was, but he would do anything to protect his sisters. I can't let you go without taking my son with you. From behind the male's back legs walked a tiny little male that was younger than Argo's little sisters. Argo looked up at him with understanding and relief. I have to get back to the herd. Please, guard him with your life. I know that you'll protect him. His name is Troop. Good journey. And with that, the male ran off to join the rest of the herd. Argo looked at Troop, the newest member of his mini herd, and smiled at him. Troop, you're gonna come with us, okay? Troop nodded and followed Argo as they all ran away. The next few days were unbearable. Lightning struck everywhere. Argo tried his best to find shelter, and at the last minute, when they found a little cave they could burrow in, one of the little sisters didn't make it in on time, and the lightning struck the wet area that surrounded her. She didn't make it. That night, Argo and what remained of his sisters cried. Troop was still too young to really understand what was going on, but what he did understand is that no one wanted to talk, and that tomorrow was going to be more of the same. For the next few weeks, Argo and his little sisters and the new little male that was with them, Troop, all struggled to survive. The storm was relentless. They had to keep moving because everywhere they found to hide became flooded. Trees were ripped from out of the ground, a ground that they had remained rooted in for decades and centuries. Argo and his family saw bigger animals than they were floating through the air being carried by the wind. Some met a very violent end. He watched as the river came upon the land, and he watched as the wind knocked two of his sisters into nearby debris, impaling them both. He found a cave, one already being occupied by a monstrous creature with spikes on its face, back, and stomach. He felt the pain as one of its spikes went clean through his leg, and he experienced the fear of dying when the creature rested all of its weight on top of him, causing him not to be able to breathe. As the light left his eyes and he was beginning to lose consciousness, he heard his three last remaining sisters screaming out his name in terror that they would lose their brother, while watching the very young male just sitting there watching the whole thing go down. To his horror, he saw his little sister, the oldest of the bunch, risk her life by shoving her tiny horns into the creature's hide, or at least trying to, because every time she tried to charge it, the spikes went through her scales. He watched as the large creature took her tail and ripped it clean off her body. Sheila fell to the ground crying, and even still urging her big brother Argo to run for his life, to forget about them, to go and survive for all of them, and to take Troop, and how sorry she was that they were weak, and why she understood that the adults had to leave them behind. Argo was not as large as this creature, but he was enraged. His body no longer felt like it belonged to him. It suddenly was performing actions he didn't even know he could do. Digging his stubby claws into the earth, he watched as the landscape changed around him with every bout of furious emotion. He watched as spiky roots came from out of the ground and wrapped themselves around the creature, its spikes suddenly rendering it helpless. When he beat his tail into the ground and his tears mixed in with the dirt to form the mud around his feet, he witnessed rock formation suddenly encapsulating the creature, suffocating it. He watched it with a vengeance as it suddenly became rock, one with the landscape, just another landmark, as though a creature never even existed. Then, as his breath was steadily let go, and he felt the vigor of his victory, he silently commanded the earth to swallow up what remained of this creature that now looked like a rocky, muddy mess, entangled in very thick roots. In his periphery, Argo saw his little sisters with their mouth wide open. They suddenly went to him. One of them did anyway. The other went to Sheila, his sister, who was bleeding out on the ground. And then everything went dark. When Argo came to, blinking very slowly, everything was alien to him, and for a moment he didn't realize where he was. He could hear the storm raging outside, even louder than it had been before. He also realized that he was no longer by the entrance of this cave. He was a bit further back. It was cold and damp, and he ached all over. Suddenly he remembered. He got up with a start and heard something crack. Sheila! The two other sisters looked over at him. Moonglade! Moonglade, he's awake! What? The other sister, Barbell, left Troop to eat on whatever he was feasting on and ran over to go see her big brother. Argo, are you okay? I've been better. How's Sheila? Please, I need to see her. Alright, take it easy. She's really hurt. She hasn't been awake for a long time. Argo managed to pull himself over, his back legs dragging behind him. Sheila was lying on her side. Her tail was nowhere in sight, and she was lying in a pool of blood. Moonglade looked warily at her sister. With tears in her eyes, she looked back up at her big brother, feeling like a failure. She feels as though she should have protected her siblings more. What use was it? Maybe Sheila was right. Sheila? Sheila, wake up. How's she doing? Moonglade began sobbing. Not good, Argo. I think we're gonna lose her. Just be prepared. She hasn't opened her eyes for a long time, and she probably won't at this point. Why is she sitting in her blood? There was a bigger pool of blood near the entrance, and we dragged her back here. Anywhere we put her, she just keeps bleeding. I think the only reason why the pool isn't bigger is because there's no more blood left to bleed. Barbell started crying. But she told us something. She wanted to know if you were okay, and she gave us a message to give to you. What? She said that you're supposed to leave us. No. I'm not leaving you guys. After everything that's happened, we first lost Tipsy, and then Tiny and Moffat, and now we're gonna lose Sheila, and for all of that, with only you three left, I'm supposed to just give up and leave you? Then their deaths would have been for nothing. Besides, why would I take Troop and leave you guys? Label trusted me with his son's life. I'm not going to take care of someone else's kid and not take care of my little sisters. That makes no sense. And quite frankly, I find it insulting that you would even ask me that. It's not us, said Moonglade. She asked us. Well, I don't know if you realize this, but looking at her condition, she is in no position to be commanding anyone. We'll sit by her, we'll do what we can for her, and then we'll continue on. Argo cuddled around his sister, Sheila. It felt weird, her not having a tail. He looked up at his feet, realizing they had been soaked in some liquid that was now cold. He saw that it was her blood, all crusty and dry. He felt her heartbeat. Putting his head on her side, he realized that she barely had one. It was barely audible, and when he did hear it, the beats were so far and few in between. He knew she was just about dead, and at any moment he would no longer hear a beat. He wanted to wait for her last breath. The sisters just sat there, Barbel grooming Troop, Moonglade looking off into the distance, but Argo could tell that she was listening. She was listening to see what would happen to Sheila. Argo wondered what she was listening for, and then when he heard it, he knew. All other ambient noise got pushed into the background as he focused on Sheila's breathing. There it was. The dying breath. The last big puff of energy. The sound of the soul leaving its case. Argo had no idea how much emotion he was holding back until he heard the spirit of his sister leave her body. He broke down and cried louder than he ever has. Moonglade and Barbel gathered around him, hugging their tails, something that they don't even have a memory of being on their sister anymore, since this is the last time they saw her, the last way that they saw her. They all sobbed together. Argo sobbed the loudest, which actually surprised him. He found himself thinking that at that moment, why is he crying so loud? His sister should be the one crying like this. But maybe that's because, well, he felt guilty. He was supposed to protect his sisters, and almost all of them were dead. Now he understands why the grown-ups wanted to just kill the offspring. This isn't fair to them. It isn't fair to have them suffer. If they're all going to die anyway, it would have been a mercy just killing them from the get-go. As Argo cried and looked at his sisters on either side, both of their heads hanging down, crying over their lost sister, he looked into the distance and he understood what he had to do. His father always told him if he was going to be a grown-up, he had to make grown-up decisions. And maybe this was a mistake. Maybe he should have listened. 2 hours later, Sheila's body had already become stiff. Argo asked his sisters to help him to carry her. There was a cliff face, and he wanted her to have a view overlooking the sky, so that way it could be like she's flying. Moonglade and Barbel were very happy about this. They thought it was sweet and endearing. They made a very shallow grave right over the edge of the cliff, a big outcropping that looked like a neck with no head. Then they put rocks all around. Argo looked at his tinier sisters as they meticulously placed the rocks in a design that reminded them of Sheila. Argo smiled at them. "I love you guys so much." Moonglade looked up at her brother and then looked at Barbel. Barbel cried, and Moonglade hugged her brother. "We love you too. Thanks for everything that you did for us. Can we say something?" "Yeah, go ahead." Moonglade looked over the sky facing the rocky grave. "Sheila, you were the best of us, and you always kept us safe, and you always made our shells look pretty. You didn't deserve to die like that, but you died protecting your family. And I think Mom and Dad would be very proud. Especially the Chief, he'd be proud too. So I hope that somehow, before you really, really go, that you know that we really miss you, and we're so glad that you were our sister." Argo smiled, but it wasn't a smile of joy. He wasn't even smiling at what she said. He looked over at Barbel and urged her to go over to the grave as well and lay a kiss on it, telling her sister goodbye. Both sisters wept, Argo began sobbing, and he went closer to his sisters. He looked at the grave, and with a heaving sigh and a painful breath, he let his sister Sheila go. In his heart, he released her, knowing that she wouldn't come back, and then he shoved his two little sisters over the cliff. It took a while before their bodies hit the bottom. He held his breath and waited for the sound of their flesh hitting the rocks below. He heard it, one right after the other. One took a while to stop, and then he heard what sounded like a squeak. He shuddered. "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." He could hear rocks falling below. He crawled on his belly, unable to stand up straight with what he just did. He tipped his head over the edge to look. He saw their little bodies smushed, blood draining down the sides of the rocks that they broke their bodies on. Barbell was still moving. Her leg was twitching. Her eyes were still open and blinking, but not really seeing anything. He wondered if she felt betrayal, if she was actually wondering what happened, or if she knew that her brother had pushed her over the edge, if she would even understand or remember the words she had just said to him a few hours ago. They didn't ask for this. Argo wanted to throw up, particularly because one of his little sisters was still alive. Down there, she was dying, no doubt, but she was dying slowly and painfully. He felt like this was worse than what it would have been like in the storm. He tipped his head over the edge. Surely she must be dead now, but she wasn't. She was still blinking and started seizing. And then the worst thing imaginable that he could think of happened. She spoke his name. His name, gurgling in a pool of her own liquid, no doubt, but it was his name. "Argo, help me. Argo, I fell." Argo lost it. "I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Oh my God." He jumped backwards, losing his footing and heading for the exit. He stopped short when he saw the little male troop standing there, having seen the entire thing. "Troop!" The little baby male cried out and ran for his life, thinking that he would be next. "No!" Of course, Argo had no intention of killing him. He made a promise to guard him with his life. He would take the little male. He doesn't even know why he would do that. I mean, all the babies were supposed to be killed. Why should he leave this male alive and he killed his own sisters? I mean, that was the whole point in the first place. Did he do the right thing? What did he do? Why did he do this? And then it hit him. He stopped chasing after the little infant and thought to himself. He started to process what just happened. He just killed his two remaining sisters. They trusted him. He remembered the words he said to them before he left. He asked them to trust him. He coerced them to trust him. And he killed them. He betrayed them. They didn't even see it coming. What has he done? What did he do? Why did he do that? He sat down in the middle of the cave and just stared into space. And when all the emotion hit him, the levity of what he had done, he screamed, an agonizing, pain-stricken scream, wishing that somehow this was all a dream and he could take it back, that his sisters were still hugging on to him, that Sheila was still alive, that they were still all in their nest, waiting for their mom to come home, waiting for him to come read them a bednight story, or tell them a bednight tale or something. He just screamed.